Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar here. My name's Matt Briggs. I'm an insurance agent with Insurance Office of America. I've been doing insurance for over 20 years, and pretty recently I've been diving deep into employee engagement and how it affects risk management, safety, things like that we can then, have an impact on insurance programs for our clients. With me today is Diana Plew. Diana, would you just introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Diana Plew. I'm an attorney over at Sheets and Bailey. We handle construction, all construction litigation, construction contracts. In addition, I also specialize in employee matters and advising companies on the most current state and federal employment laws to make sure they're in compliance.
Awesome. All right, so everyone, today we're going to be talking about a various number of topics. We're going to start off with an introduction to employee engagement. It's kind of an emerging field of study, and it's really being looked at hard in a lot of white collar, a lot of tech, the healthcare industry. They're all looking at this, and I don't hear a lot of blue collar, construction, manufacturing. I just don't hear a lot of stories about those types of organizations tackling this or looking into it. And I thought it'd be, a good opportunity to kind of just lay out what it is at a high level. And maybe it's something that the construction industry really would benefit from. I think it definitely would be. So that's why we're trying to share this today. We're also going to be talking about some, just some insurance things around employees, and also some COVID-19 information around employees, as well as litigation around employees as well. So with that, we'll kind of roll into the first slide here, which is high level. What is employee engagement? So employee engagement is basically the emotional commitment an employee has to their work, their team's goals, and their company's mission. Now, I don't want to get too foofy right off the bat. Again, this is intended for blue collar. This is we're going to try to put this in the dirt so you guys can work with it instead of just having it be a mind exercise. So, emotional, yes, emotions are what cause people to act. As a business, we're going to want our employees to act in a certain way that will lead to the results that we desire as a business. So it's important for our employees to be kind of emotionally committed. Do they feel good coming to work? Do they want to work? Do they want to put a good work product out? Those are the types of things. When I say feelings, feelings could be, at the end of the day, your team did a good job and they give a high five or something like that. And they're proud of what they did. So emotional, we're not talking about reading a book and crying about it. We're talking about feeling good over doing a good job. And that's basically what employee engagement is trying to get to the bottom of, is how do we have our employees have that experience? And we're going to say why that's important. So why does employee engagement matter? So employee engagement, which we just defined as having that, the emotional connection to your work, to the organization, to your team, any number of those things, has been found to positively impact the following areas and more. But work quality, huge one, right? Contracting, we have to be putting out quality work. Productivity, are our guys putting in a full day of work? Are they productive? Are they going through the motions? Are they putting out a lot of output? Safety is a big one. Employee engagement, there's some really good studies on safety and how much better your safety records can get with engaged employees. Customer satisfaction, how happy with the end product and with the experience of your team on site, whether it be a GC might be the customer, it might be the building owner might be the customer, the project manager, whatever it is, are they satisfied? Do they have a good experience with, again, the work quality, the productivity, how safe everyone was. So that's all going to impact customer satisfaction. Profitability, I should have probably put that one first because it's, you know, a nice impactful one. But there's been some really good studies of highly engaged workforces being much more profitable than non-engaged or disengaged workforces. Turnover is another huge one. Employee engagement reduces turnover. Again, if you have somebody that feels good at work, they're happy, they're being paid fairly, they're going to be much harder for another company to come in and take. They're not going to be looking for a job anywhere else. And so, you know, turnover could be probably an issue for construction, and it's going to be improved with a better employee engagement strategy. And there's others, but the list is too long to go through. So, you know, I referenced some studies. This is being researched pretty good. In 2011, a meta-analysis, which is a study of a bunch of different studies, showed that task and contextual performance were both improved. And again, these are over the statistically significant levels. So task performance, that's pretty understandable, right? They can achieve more tasks. They can get more work done in a shorter amount of time. And contextual performance, let me explain what that one means a little bit. So contextual performance is going to be the ability to think outside the box. So if you've got a guy that's, you know, needs to do A, B, C, and D, but then he runs into a problem in one of those steps, contextual performance, if they have a high contextual performance, they'll be able to problem solve on the spot, find a solution and work through it, versus if they have a low contextual performance, they're going to run back to a supervisor, they're going to stall, they're not going to get around, they're not going to find ways to either do things better, problem solve, right? So it's above and beyond. It's all the above and beyond stuff that really makes employee an asset is contextual performance. It's not just getting the task done, it's problem solving and things of that nature. So now you're wondering, okay, this sounds good. Well, how do I do it? How do I increase the engagement of my workforce? That's the $1 million question right now. So we're not here to provide necessarily answers, although we're going to try to give you some strategies. But really thinking about it now is the first step. So each company, each individual employee in those companies, they're all unique. They all have their initial frame of reference. They all have different characteristics. They all have different motivations. So there really is, if anyone's, you know, working with somebody or somebody's telling you there's a one size fits all, you know, I would not put a lot of trust in those people. It's got to be thought about specific to your company, specific to the employees that you have. So it is kind of a heavy lift. Your location, right? Are we an East Coast company or West Coast? Now we're all East Coast, but we're upstate New York, not downstate, right? We're New York, not New Jersey. We're New York, not Pennsylvania. All these things matter. Your company size matters. You have one team with 5 guys. You have 30 teams, you know, in 40 guys, or, you know, 100 guys. So that's going to matter. What industry? And now this is a contractor's webinar, so you're all in the contracting industry. And I already mentioned that this is not, from what I've seen, the research I've seen has not shown that there's a big push to do employee engagement in the contracting field. So it might be even a heavier lift. I don't know. We'll have to explore that. And there's other factors that would indicate what the solutions or what the techniques you're going to use or the tools you're going to use. Slow and steady, right? So this is going to be a long, heavy lift. It's almost like lifelong learning for your company. You're going to have to continually evaluate what you're doing, measure, is it working, is it not working, and then come up with maybe a new solution or add stuff over time. But I mean, multi-year, probably a multi-decade process. And that can be scary, right? Like, oh, that's way too long. But if the goal is to be the best of the best, which we'll kind of dig into a little bit of what that means, is it worth doing? I believe it's worth doing. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it. But I think to get to, to get to the level of let's think about like pro sports, right? Like I probably shouldn't use this analogy because we are in upstate New York, but do you want to be the New England Patriots or do you want to be the Cleveland Browns? To me, I want to be the Patriots all day long, even though I'm not a Patriots fan per se, right? But I want their success. I want their culture. They continually take guys, pay them less, and those guys outperform other very high paid guys across, on the other team. And a lot of it just has to do with the culture they built, the mindset, the engagement, right? Those team captains that when a new guy comes in and they're like, hey, this is the Patriot way, you're either with us or you're out, right? And they'll pay a guy a lot of money and then drop him a week into it. I remember they had Albert Hainsworth come in, huge, talent in the offensive line. I think it was offensive line. It was either offense or defensive line. And he was just he wouldn't fit with the culture, and they dumped him. And everyone was like, "Oh my God, he's so talented," but he's not on the team. He wasn't being a team player, and that's more important to the Patriots than what your talent is. In their successes, it speaks for itself. So slow and steady, continual process, continual improvement. You got to do it for the right reasons too. I mentioned profitability. If that's the only reason you do this, everyone on your team will see through it, right? It's going to be insincere, and you may do even more damage than good with an insincere attempt. If your employees feel like they're being manipulated, they're not going to trust you, right? So we don't want to do something that's going to erode the trust in your workforce, because that will even make them more disengaged, which again, if engagement leads to more productivity, better quality work, better safety, we can imagine disengagement, worse safety record, less productive, all those things. So we don't want to do something for the wrong reason. We want to do it for the right reason, which is to win, right? Like we all want to win. Your guys want to win just as much as you want to win as the business owner or as the foreman or, whatever your role in the company is. If you want to win, your guys want to win too. Your team wants to win. So what are some strategies, right? So we've talked a lot of conceptual stuff here. These, again, they may or may not fit. I think they're pretty good strategies for the construction industry. I don't know that they're going to work. If I was designing a program or if I was working with somebody, this is what I would start with. There would be some maybe low-hanging fruit. And I call this one the supervisor. Is your supervisor a boss or are they a coach? And I'll go through some statistics and then I'll go through a little bit of my thoughts on this. So 50% of Americans have left a job to get away from their manager at some point in their career. This information comes from Gallup, which is they do a lot of career polling data. So half of the people in this country at some point in their career have left a job to get away from their manager, the person that they directly report to. Another Gallup poll says the manager accounts for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement. So again, we're looking for stuff that we can have an impact on. The manager could be the biggest lever in if your employees are engaged or disengaged, right? Very important person in your organization is the manager of your labor force. You may have more than one, you may have one. If you're a small entity, the owner may be it, right? So this is going to be a big difference, but it's going to be the person that's kind of like the head coach of the team. And if it's a smaller team, you got a head coach and maybe you got a general manager, but It's going to be the one lowest to the players. So coaches, right? Most of us probably played sports growing up. Coaches are tasked with helping players on their team grow skills, perform better, and a good coach, in my opinion, does it through encouragement and attention to their progression and effort. These are my own thoughts. Somebody may have some different thoughts. I like this because I've had some really good coaches in my athletic career, and this is what I thought of when I said, why did I like them? Why do I think I performed well under them versus maybe I didn't perform as well with a different coach? And this is kind of what I came up with. The boss, right? Yeah, if you're thinking of yourself and you're like, yeah, no, I'm the boss here. You know best. They need to do what you say, when you say, and how you say. Again, this is not going to lead to a good mindset. It's not going to lead to growth. It's going to frustrate people. They're not thinking that you're in it for them. They're thinking like, oh, like I'm disposable. I'm here for them, not the other way around. It's not a two-way street. But, just do your job, shut up. I pay you to work, just work. That's kind of like the mindset I think of when I think of like a boss. So I'm going to go into a little story here about the best coach I ever had and what was so valuable that he did for me and my teammates, and why I think that type of an approach can work for an employee instead of just, somebody on their team. I think there's so much overlap here that we need to talk about. So it was my high school cross country coach, and he was a couple years on the job when I got there as a freshman, and we were, just an average team. We didn't win our conference championship. Our guys did okay. I think one of our runners actually went to the state meet. The year before, nobody did. But over time, with his coaching, we ended up becoming league champions for like 10 years in a row. We won sectionals, we won states. We became a powerhouse. We became much like the New England Patriots for 15 years. My generation and classes after me. And what he did, he was also the wrestling coach. He was tough. He drove us hard. He would sometimes yell at us. Actually, most of the times he would yell at us. He pushed us to our breaking points and passed over and over and over again. What he also did, though, which was critical, was that every time one of us broke and felt like we couldn't go on anymore and we were defeated, he would put his arm around us and take us aside and say, you did a great job. You are working so hard. Look at the effort you're putting in and how much you're getting out of it. I know you're hurt right now, but we all have your back. I have your back. Take a rest day, take the rest of the day off, come back tomorrow and let's get back after it. So he didn't beat us down into submission and then just keep beating us down. As soon as he saw that we needed to be picked up, he would pick us back up. And he continually did this, and we got to the point where we would just push ourselves past breaking points. Like we got so competitive with each other. I remember my 10th grade year, I won our conference meet as a sophomore. The next year, I think I was 4th on my team, and we took the top 5 in the conference. Like that's how competitive it got so quickly with all of our guys. We didn't have any more talent than any of the schools around us, right? So this is not like a story of like the water in my hometown was better for cross country. It's just not the case. It was the coaching and the culture that he built around just pushing harder than anyone else would. And then when somebody buckled, when somebody cracked, pick them back up, right? Everyone surround them. We had a brotherhood. It was like a family. And, that pushed us from an average team, again, to championship team over and over and over again. So I think we can apply that type of a mindset of helping somebody grow, helping them get better, pushing them to get better, to our workforces, to our the players that we have on the team that are out there playing the game, doing the job. So I think that's one good strategy. And a lot of your supervisors may have had a great coach in their past, and it may be easy for them to adopt that mindset and see the value in it. So I don't know that this one would be that hard to, that hard of a thing for somebody to get their mind around and to start implementing, or at least, trying it out. Another good strategy, right, is creating some career paths, so that you create some security, right? It's mental security, it's financial security, it can be a bunch of things. But if somebody starts out at a company and they know that there is a path for them to get better and advance, they're more inclined to stay there. So here's a statistic: 93% of people advance their career path by taking a position at another company, right? So most companies don't have good career paths. You come, you work, hey, I'm paying you to do this job, and then that's kind of it. We don't talk about what you can do next, or layouts, in 2 years you'll be doing this, and then 2 more years you'll be doing this. And they can't see those future, the benefit of staying at that company. They can't see it because it's not being told to them. So they get better, and then they start looking, where can I find a place to use my new skills, in the talents that I've been developing at this company? Can I use it at another company? Is there somebody looking for somebody like me? So I say, don't train and develop your competitor's new employee, right? Like, don't put the time and effort in to teach them your way, how you want it done, developing them, which again, you got to be doing, right? You want your guys and your girls on your team to get better, but don't lose them then to your competitor, because now you've just given a competitor a great employee, or potentially a great employee. So one of the things we want to do is identify your best employees, really anyone that you see like, oh, this person has some potential. I can see them. This is the type of person I want on my team. They're a team player. They've got some good attributes to them. Identify them early and develop a path with them. Say, what do you, maybe it's a discussion, a back and forth. What do you want? What can we offer you? How can we make this so that you don't want to leave here? And then, is it something that we can accomplish? That will be better than losing that person, and that's a great talent for your competitor. They will be more likely to stay and use their skills and abilities that they develop under you to benefit your company. So, some ideas on career paths. It could be just learning new trades or skills. Maybe you go from a general laborer, and then, in 2 years, we want to have you doing trade work, or, hey, you're really good with the people on the team. Maybe you're future management, right? So you can kind of, again, you don't want to be insincere. You don't want to dangle something and never give it to somebody. But having a career path is something that definitely helps people feel connected and cared about, and they're more likely to stay longer. So again, those are kind of two that I don't think it doesn't really necessarily cost any money. Now I will say, training, there is supervisor training out there. Maybe that's beneficial. Maybe you go further than the coach mindset and you say, well, my foremen were previously just good at their trade, and then they became foremen because that was the logical next path for them. But maybe they've never been trained as a supervisor. So look into training. There's local training. I'm involved in an organization rated MVCC. It's the Center for Leadership Excellence, and we have the Supervisors Institute, which trains supervisors. It's a short program. It's not a lot of money, but it's very good. And there's going to be there's going to be other training like that out there, right? There's many options. I would just look for what's out there and what makes sense. Look at the curriculums and see what looks like it'll be beneficial for your supervisors. So 2 quick short stories. These are just kind of light and lighthearted, but this is, when I think of a highly engaged employee, I like this story a lot. So here's the story. President John Kennedy, he was visiting NASA headquarters for the first time in 1961. While touring the facility, he introduced himself to a janitor who was mopping the floor, and he asked him what he did at NASA. And the janitor replied, "I'm helping put a man on the moon," right? The janitor got it. He understood the vision, his part in it. He had a purpose. He was not there to push a broom around. He was there to put a man on the moon. He felt that, right? Like this was just an impromptu little thing, and it was kind of widely reported on at the time of, oh, that was interesting, the mindset of this janitor. So it doesn't even necessarily need to be only your, high-end top employees are engaged. You want everyone engaged all the way through, because this guy's, I'm guarantee he's doing a good job. He's taking pride in his work. So that would be a good thing for all your employees to have that kind of mindset. Disengaged employee. What is a disengaged employee? Joe is a disengaged employee. So this is just a joke, but this work center has been accident free since Joe left. You don't necessarily want Joe, or if you have Joe, you want to develop him and get him engaged, because he's obviously not engaged, right? So not engaged. They're thinking about other stuff while they're supposed to be doing their job. And if it's a high risk activity, that's very bad, right? Like, are they going to be distracted, disengaged, not thinking about what they're doing on a high risk activity, and cause a giant issue? From an insurance standpoint, is it a huge claim? Is there a giant property damage? Do they hurt themselves or somebody else really badly by being disengaged during a high risk activity? Or if it's a low risk activity, is there a lot of just these little frequent bumps and bruises and little stuff that happens? Maybe they're engaged in a high risk, but then they disengage when it's low risk activity. So Joe's disengaged all around, and you don't want him on your job site. All right, so that's really the high level for employee engagement. That's really all I want to get into at this point. There's a lot more to it. If anyone has any questions, definitely feel free to contact me. But there's a lot to it, and there's too much to digest all at once. So I felt like that would just be a good introduction to what it is, and maybe a couple tips on how to start moving the needle on it.
Thanks, Matt.
Diana, what do you think? What do you think on all that? Have you put some thought into employee engagement much, or what's your feelings on it?
I think an engaged employee, one that feels like that they are included, the company has an interest in them, they are more than likely to give their best performance for you. They're going to pay attention, which is going to lead to less downtime, less accidents, and more productivity. An employee who doesn't feel like they're important, who feels like they're just being used for nothing other than to make profit for the employer, they're, as Matt said, they're going to be looking, and they're not going to be at their top performance. And that's when you lead to accidents, and that's when you lead to discontent. And when you lead to discontent, you can lead to other employee problems, such as feelings of being discriminated against, harassment. It can either make them feel like that the reason they're not being advanced is because maybe there's some kind of discrimination, or maybe they become an employee who is being combative with other employees. One of the things right along with engagement, and one of the big issues, this is a big, right now we have the Me Too movement, you have racial discrimination. It's at the forefront. The Supreme Court just said Title VII covers gender discrimination and sexual orientation. All these different types or say areas or categories of protected classes, discrimination, they're at the forefront right now. It's been one of the hottest topics in the last 2 years. You had Harvey Weinstein falling, you had Jeffrey Epstein. This is happening not just, all over every industry. There's been an increase in harassment complaints and discrimination complaints. And part of it is because people now feel like they're being heard. Because many states, including New York, have passed new legislation about sexual harassment that requires every employer to have sexual harassment training for their employees. They passed the Gender. New York State has what's called a Gender Act, which now makes gender discrimination covered by the human rights law. So someone who is male but identifies as a female or is transactional, they're covered now. You can't discriminate against them because they don't fit into your nice, neat category of what, in the past, this is what a male worker was, this is what a female worker was. The construction industry is still only 9% in the construction industry. There's only about 9% of the workers are female. About 30% are Latin or Hispanic descent. Only about 5% are African American and 2% are Asian. And that's from the Labor Bureau statistics that those numbers come from. So construction is starting to increase, but there's still not a very diverse area of work. So what can companies do to engage employees? They should have a diversity and inclusion program. And a lot of the big construction companies, they've already adopted these. I know Gilbane has a diversity and inclusion program. Floor has a diversity and inclusion program. What does a diversity and inclusion? Why should you have one? Because it helps stimulate the company and innovation. It helps creativity. If everybody comes from the same background, they were brought up the same way, sometimes you all fall into a pattern of thinking the same way. So bringing in a diverse workforce brings in creativity and ways to look at products and ways to look at problems. Diversity and inclusion programs, they can improve employee morale and interactions because people feel like they're being heard and they're being included. And it can also help decrease discrimination and harassment claims. If you have a program that is encouraging diversity, encouraging inclusion, people are less apt to feel like they're being discriminated against and harassment. So what does this mean for you on a construction site? Well, diversity and inclusion, what it means for you on a construction site is to make sure as a supervisor you are paying attention. As a supervisor, you're responsible for all your employees' actions underneath you. If you see discrimination or harassment going on, you have a responsibility to step in and stop it. And a responsibility to solve the problem. And how do you solve the problem? That depends on your company and your policies. But as a supervisor, your actions are imputed to your employer. So companies should be training their supervisors on how to recognize discrimination, how to recognize harassment, and how to make people feel included. Instead of feeling, excluded because they don't fit in with the rest of the people on the construction site. It's very easy if you are the only woman or the only person of color on a construction site to feel like that you are the outcast. And you don't want that to happen. When that happens is when there's complaints and problems and issues. So you need to train your supervisors and train all your employees on diversity and inclusion. as well as harassment and discrimination. And I can go on. Harassment and discrimination is such a big issue right now. Trust me, I could spend a couple hours on this. And it's New York in the last 3 years, Southern District of New York, they came down with the biggest verdict in favor of one person, a woman who claimed harassment. She got a $14 million verdict, and she got it because, yes, she was being harassed, but her supervisor did not do anything to stop or help her. As a matter of fact, didn't even seem to take her seriously. And that's a big deal. So you need to have your supervisors on a on-site construction site. If they see harassment going on or discrimination, they need to step in. If they have one of their own employees, or even say another employee for another subcontractor, come up to them and say, hey, so and so with your firm has been saying these comments, you need to step in. You're responsible for your employees' actions, but you're also responsible to a degree for people who you've brought onto the site underneath you, vendors, subcontractors. So it's your duty to step in. Now, since I could go on for this topic forever, we're going to stop now. And if you have any questions afterwards, you can type them in and I'll be glad to ask them. Just make sure you have a written sexual harassment and discrimination policy in place. All your employees have the annual training and they understand what types of actions can be discrimination and harassment. It goes beyond, jokes can be, unwanted touching can be, but those are some of the obvious ones. But it can also be stuff like just making comments. Oh, she can't drive that because she's a woman and no woman can drive. They can't possibly do the job. That's discrimination. Or based on your age, I don't think you have the capability to even do this job. So we're not even, I'm not even going to send you out there to do that. You're just making assumptions about people based on their protected class, whether it's age, whether it's their sex, whether it's their race, that they can't do this. Now, with these specific projects coming up, besides being able to recognize harassment and discrimination, what in this day and age do you have to also look out for? Well, as we are in 2020, and 2020 is the year of throwing, it seems like, everything out there at everybody at once, we have coronavirus. Coronavirus, and we have New York's, and I probably skipped a couple. I skipped a slide, but one of the bottom of that slide has to do with supervisors knowing the coronavirus rules. So that's what we are going to get into. So,
Sorry, I can jump around a little bit if you need me to.
Yeah. So the coronavirus. As these jobs are going on down in the Mohawk Valley region and the construction sites, the coronavirus, New York's coronavirus worksite safety plan requirements are still in place. So on a construction site, you must remember have a coronavirus safety plan. You should have a coronavirus site safety manager named who's going to be responsible to make sure the safety plan is followed. One part of the safety plan, remember, is that you need to have signs up informing people that they must maintain social distance of 6 feet apart, telling them that they should constantly wash their hands or sanitize them, that if they feel sick at all, they are immediately to report to their supervisor. Okay? Construction sites. Per New York State, if you are working within an existing building, you're not supposed to have more than one worker for 250 square feet. And I made a typo there. Allowed on site, excluding supervisors. You can get around this if, for safety of the core activity, you're required to have more people there and you use personal protective measures, such as the proper face mask. New York State, as you know, if you're going to be within 6 feet of each other, it doesn't matter if you're on a construction site now or if you're in a grocery store, you're required to wear a mask. But when you're on a construction site, you're required to wear face masks that's normally required for that type of work. So if that type of work required an N95 mask, then that's what you have to wear. If that type of work you're doing doesn't normally require masks, then you can just use a paper mask or a handmade cloth mask. All workers, when you can't be in 6 feet, you must wear a mask. There are supposed to be hand stations, hand sanitizing stations, and hand washing stations throughout the facility. If you are going to be, and you can go to the next slide now. Okay. If you're going to enter a space, remember the maximum capacity for a space, whether it's a vehicle or enclosed space like an elevator, is 50% of the maximum capacity, even if you're wearing masks. So if the capacity says 4, you can only have 2 people on it at once. Even when you're wearing masks, you can't go above that 50% capacity. So if you're driving from your company's office location to work in a vehicle that has, say, sits 6 people, you are only supposed to have 3 in it, even if you're wearing masks. You also areas must be, as a site supervisor, you must make sure areas are being regularly cleaned and disinfected. They are supposed to be cleaned after every shift in that area. So if you have one shift, say, working in hallway A from 8 to 3, and another shift is supposed to come in, say they're working nights to catch up, in that same hallway, well, between those shifts, it has to be cleaned and disinfected before the new employees come in, new workers. You also, every worker before they enter the site is supposed to be asked if they have been exposed to anybody who's tested positive for COVID-19, if they have been within close proximity of anyone who has symptoms of COVID-19, if they themselves have tested positive or have symptoms of COVID-19. If they answer yes to any of those questions, you are supposed to send them home immediately. If they have, and switch to the next screen. If they have tested positive for COVID-19 and they were like on the site the day before, you are going to have to ask them who they've been around. You need to have a list of workers for tracing. So the site safety manager is supposed to do these health screenings every day. You have the option, if you want to, you can take temperatures, but you are not required to take temperatures of employees entering. You should have a sign-in sheet or log of all workers or visitors that are on the work site, so that if something does happen and you have a positive employee, you can cooperate with DOH with the contact tracing. They're going to ask for a list of those. And if you want to go to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So what happens if, well, those are the 3 questions you need to ask, which I already went over. Sorry, I was skipping slides. And the next slide tells you what happens if you have an employee that answers yes to any of those questions. So if you have an employee that answers yes, and you can go to the next slide.
Is it the return to work one?
Yeah. So if you have an employee that has answered yes, you have to send them home immediately. Okay. If that employee has tested positive, that employee has to self-quarantine, and they can't return to work until completing 10 days of isolation from the onset of symptoms, or if asymptomatic, 10 days of isolation from the date of the positive test. Okay. If after the 10 days is up, the employee still has symptoms, he still has a fever, then he should stay home until he's symptom-free for 24 hours. Okay. An employee who's been exposed to a person with COVID-19 who tested positive and is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 must self-isolate for 10 days from the onset of the symptoms. And if after 10 days the employee is still experiencing symptoms, he's not to return to work until, again, he's symptom-free for 24 hours. Really, it's symptom-free, one of the big ones being fever-free. But an employee who has had close or proximate contact with a person who has COVID-19 but is not experiencing symptoms has to self-quarantine for 14 days before they can return to work. Close contact means you've been within 6 feet of an employee for 10 minutes. 6 feet of someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 for 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Okay. And if an employee has symptoms of COVID-19 but has not been in close contact with a person who's tested positive for COVID-19, then that employee can return to work upon a negative COVID-19 result, or if no test taken 10 days after self-isolation from the onset of symptoms. So in other words, if I'm showing, last week I was sneezing, I had an earache, I knew it was from allergies, but some of those can be symptoms of COVID-19. I can return to work though. on that case, because I wasn't exposed to anybody on having a negative test. I didn't have to wait the whole 10 days. And I was right. I had breathed in a ton of ragweed, so I had allergies. And I'm very, very, very allergic to ragweed. It makes my throat close down and stuff. So, and unfortunately, my neighbor was mowing outside, and they were mowing all the ragweed that was around their yard. So it was blowing, and it was very windy, so it was blowing over. So, you also have to be aware that if you have an employee that travels to any of the states on the list right now from New York State, the quarantine list, they've been in that one of those states for more than 24 hours, well, then they have to self-quarantine upon their return to New York. If you sent them to one of those states for a work purpose, well, then they can be entitled to benefits under the federal Families First Coronavirus Act if they hadn't already used it for having to self-quarantine. If they went there for vacation, New York State won't pay them under New York State's Sick Leave Act, but the federal government hasn't said anything and forbid it. So technically, they could still be paid under the Family First 2 weeks worth of sick time under the federal one.
For taking the self-quarantine.
Yeah. So, and yes, I know you want to say employees can, as an employer, you want to say you can't go on vacation, but you can't regulate what your employees do on their downtime.
Downtime, yeah.
So it's kind of a catch-22. They're still allowed to go on vacation, and if they haven't used that 2 weeks worth of sick leave under the Families First for Federal First Coronavirus Act for COVID-19 symptoms, they could get paid to self-quarantine under the federal, because they haven't ruled on it yet. New York State has said, no, you're not getting it under New York State's emergency COVID paid leave if you went voluntarily on vacation to one of these states,
right,
that are quarantined. So these things must be, when you're on these work sites, you must make sure that you're abiding by New York State's coronavirus rules or coronavirus job site rules. If you fail to do this and you get turned in, your employer can get fines. They can possibly be fined up to $10,000. It goes by offenses. It depends on how many offenses you have. Like first offense is $2,000, second $5,000, third is like $10,000. Okay. Mm-hmm. The other thing that while you're on these work sites, you should be aware of is make sure your employees are taking their lunch breaks when they are supposed to. An employee who cannot work through a lunch break and just leave early from the job site. That's not New York State's law. They're violating New York State labor's laws, and if an employer can get in trouble and fined for letting employees do that. So in New York State, if you are working more than 6 hours between the hours of 11 and 2, you must take a half-hour lunch break between 11 and 2. If you are working, there's more rules if you're working later between 5 and 7 at night on when you get your lunch breaks. The lunch break does not have to be paid. It can be unpaid, but you must make sure that they take it, and they must really be on break, not doing work while eating lunch. If you must also be careful, make sure that you are keeping track carefully of all hours and the overtime rules for employees. Remember, if an employee works overtime, whether it was approved or not, they must be paid for overtime. Okay? So even if they were supposed to get permission, but they did not, you still have to pay them. You can have other disciplinary actions for not getting permission, but you have to pay them for the overtime. If this is normal 40 hours and overtime is anything over 40 hours a week, if this is a prevailing wage job, overtime is based on how many hours in a day. So if you work more than 8 hours in a day without getting a New York State exemption to work more from the state on a prevailing wage job, even if that employee only worked 36 hours for the whole week, so they say they worked 10 hours one day and the rest of the week they worked enough to make 36, they get 2 hours of overtime for that one day on a prevailing wage job. So just make sure you're keeping track carefully depending on the type of work site you are on, whether it's a private or whether it's a prevailing wage job. For that.
Ben, I just wanted to go back to this because I feel like we might have skipped over this too quickly. The importance of good supervisors.
I am here. I just have to plug my computer in really quick because I realize it's about to die.
Okay,
Sorry.
sounds good. It's very interesting. And there's, I think we see some overlap or some crossover in, in my industry of, just some of these things, especially I like to hone in on the supervisor here because I feel like they're like the keystone of a good team versus maybe a dysfunctional team.
I would agree.
And what can happen from a risk management standpoint from, an insurance claim, whether it be a workers' comp or a general liability, a property claim, something of that nature. Um, you know, having that engaged workforce could be critical to being, a 0.8 mod versus a 1.4 mod. And we all know what happens when that mod gets out of control. You can't bid on certain jobs. Your rate's so much higher, and it just makes it that much harder to be competitive on bids from that. It just it's just not a good. It can cascade is the way I like to think about it. Is like if you're good, you're in good shape. You're cruising. Everything is great. Um, and you could be getting lucky. Like if your employees are just, they're not really necessarily engaged, but you can go for a while and not have any accidents or not have, especially a smaller team or a smaller company. You could go for a while without having a claim. I mean, what we look at with big companies is they have a lot of teams out doing stuff. So that kind of shrinks the amount of time between stuff. So they might have a lot of little things and every once in a while a big thing, and it shows up in a big company, whereas a small company could go years without having anything. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're never going to have something. And if a small company has a big thing, are they going to be able to recover from it? Even if they have insurance that pays for it, um, when you have a big claim, the rates go up. Your mod goes up, the rates go up. Maybe you're in a preferred market and they drop you, and you got to go to an excess lines market. Um, Maybe you had a gap in coverage, right? Like, so we were talking about um, employees maybe taking action against the company. Most policies don't pay for that claim. That's called employment practices. It's a separate policy, and some companies buy it, some don't. Some don't even know they need to buy it. So they may not know that if their employee sues them for discrimination, probably they're not covered unless they know they're covered. Unless they know they bought that policy, they're probably not covered. And again, I mean, sometimes it could be somebody just looking to get a quick payout. Maybe they want $5,000 and they'll go away, they'll settle. Or in the case you gave, it's a $14 million claim. Do you want to take that on the chin with no coverage? Can you? Or hopefully you had a policy in place. And I can't even imagine selling somebody a policy that would cover that big of a check, but obviously needs to be in the discussion going forward of that. Oh yeah, here's a settlement this big out there. Are you covered enough? So that's, I think that's good things to think about. And, again, that's if it's a insurance claim. They could have just legal claims that may not be covered by insurance at all.
Yeah, and then as Matt said, supervisors are important. They really are the face of your company because a supervisor is considered to be acting on behalf of the owner. So their actions are imputed to you. So if they fail to take action, fail to intervene, it's going to be deemed as you are condoning this type of behavior. Whether it's harassing, discriminatory. Um, Again, not only for that, they're also going to be the ones on the job site making sure that the job goes correctly, that the safety rules are being followed so that you don't get, sued, an injury doesn't occur and you're being sued because you didn't take proper safety precautions. They're also going to be the ones with the coronavirus. And I will say right now, it's happened. Employees have filed a lawsuit out in the Midwest against Walmart for failing to take enough precautions for coronavirus, for failing to give them masks to wear, for failing to take it seriously when when the states were starting to shut things down and ensure they didn't provide the protection to the employees. It's brand new. Don't know what's going to happen. Don't know what the courts are going to say, but you
Right.
have to be aware of that. So your best defense your best defense as a employer is to be proactive, is to make sure you have policies and plans in place for coronavirus, for discrimination, for harassment, for you know, engaging your employees, all that stuff in place, but that you also follow. You can have a written policy, but you need to follow it. You need to make sure your supervisors know what your policies are and that they actually follow them. Because
And that's where I feel like the employee engagement really comes into play, because we've seen it a lot on our end of somebody has a safety manual and it's literally just sitting on the shelf, right? It's like a just a decoration on the wall. It's not, nobody's using it. The supervisors aren't teaching out of it. If they're doing their toolbox talks, are they really doing them, or are they just going through the motions and nobody's paying attention? And oh, we did our 10 minutes or whatever. So engagement, employee engagement from supervisors to the the other positions below them. Are they engaged? Do they know why there's a safety manual? Are they engaged with it and know that it's going to make it's there for a reason. It's going to make everyone safer, which means less injuries. Number one, I don't want to go home with my hand chopped off or something, but also it's going to make you perform the job better. It's going to be less downtime because of an accident or something. You're going to win more bids because your team is operating better, right? Like, these things will all just flow into it. And it's, they're all kind of connected, but engagement, it affects them all. It really does. And supervisors, I think, are that key linchpin of having that 70% impact on the engagement of the team.
And they're also going to be your key to making sure your job gets done timely. It's on site, because they're going to be the ones they're making sure and encouraging the employees to do the work and finish it. And that it's done timely, correct, and safely, so that you don't have you're not being sued for or being told delays or down the line, that you don't want to be the one delaying the project. You don't want to be the one whose work needs to be corrected because it wasn't done right the first time. So yes, supervisor, employee engagement, they all go hand in hand on having a smooth project.
For sure. Yep. Any other last thoughts? Should we wrap it up here?
I think, yeah, no, I mean, I'll be glad to answer if you guys have any questions that you want to type in. You need any further information, please feel free to contact Matt or I. We will have our information at the end of this thing, but my phone number is 315-676-7314. And my email is dplu@theconstructionlaw.com. And again, my name is Diana. And I will let Matt give his information, but we'll also put it up on at the end.
Sure. So, yep, Matt Briggs, my cell phone is 315-525-5602. And my email address is Matthew, Matthew, .Briggs, BRIGGS, @IOAUSA.com. And yeah, just like to kind of repeat what Diana said, any questions you have, and feedback too. Did you enjoy, or did you get value out of what we presented? Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like us to cover? Maybe we can do a part 2 in the future. Any questions about any specific topics, we'd be happy to dig further into it. Unfortunately, I can talk all day about this stuff, so you probably don't necessarily that, but I have more that I could go into if needed.
Matt can also advise you on what type of insurance policies you might want or need and talk to you on that. And I'd be glad, like I said, if you have any questions on any type of what you need to be doing to be compliant with New York State and federal's rules on employee matters. And I'll leave you with one final thought. Normally, if you have a question on what do you apply, if there's say the rules are different between federal and New York, just remember, usually the rule is whatever is more beneficial to the employee is what's going to be enforced. So.
Definitely.
And thank you for your time.
Thanks, everyone.